Day two of NBA free agency is coming to a close, and the Kings have still yet to do much at all. Right now, as of recording, it is July 1st, 8:37 p.m. So, of course, things can happen at any time. They can happen while I'm recording this right now. They can happen the second that I post this. So, let's hope that that doesn't happen. Let's hope, well, I do want something to happen as soon as possible, but for my sake of recording, hopefully it happens maybe tomorrow at this point or right now. But the Kings, they're still waiting, they're still working. And it sure feels like a trade is coming because you would think that if they weren't going to make a trade, they would have signed players by now. They would have gone into free agency, picked up a couple of wings, but they haven't done that at this point. And so it really seems like it's going to be Brandon Ingram or go back to Kuzma or go back to one or both of the Nets players in Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith. And so it really feels like some trade is going to come because it would be, I would say, more worrying that a big move isn't going to be made if they had just signed players and filled their roster spots and used the MLE. Because if they do that, they're limiting their flexibility to make moves. And so the fact that they haven't done that really means that they are working the phones and trying to get something done. And obviously there was a lot of buzz around Brandon Ingram on the first day of free agency, and that could still be the case. But today the rumor of the day around the Kings was around Lauri Markkanen. And he is the dream candidate to be on this Kings team, the absolute dream candidate. I haven't really understood why the Jazz would trade him, but now there are rumors that they could be looking to trade him. And it's interesting that the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Sacramento Kings were the two teams that were mentioned in that. And so the Timberwolves are definitely a surprise. Everyone knows that OKC could make a deal for him, but the Kings being mentioned in that is interesting. But I don't see it happening. He's an absolute dream candidate, but the problem is you almost certainly have to give up Keegan Murray to get him. I think at this point, Lauri Markkanen has more value than a guy like Brandon Ingram because it seems like the Pelicans, like they don't want to pay Brandon Ingram, whereas the Jazz, they could totally pay Markkanen. I don't see why they wouldn't, and they could totally keep him. Markkanen is just the better player in my opinion as well, and it just seems like with Danny Ainge in that Utah front office, they would demand Keegan Murray, and that's what it said in the tweet where this rumor came out. And that's why I haven't really discussed Markkanen at all because it doesn't seem like a feasible trade candidate. Because if you trade Keegan Murray for Markkanen, like just straight up, which can't happen obviously, but if you were just to practically trade them straight up, no picks involved or anything like that, then the Kings get better, I think. It changes up the Kings team, but Markkanen right now is just a better player. He's an older player, but he's not old. He's, 27 years old, I think. But really, in any Kings trade where the Kings are trading a wing for another wing, it really just doesn't help much. The Kings' entire problem is wing depth. I have this spreadsheet where I have the Kings roster, and I've talked about this before. Under playable wings, I have one player, and that's Keegan Murray. And so if you trade for Markkanen, he is bigger and probably, I don't know if I want to say less versatile, but he plays up rather than playing down. He can play on the perimeter, but he's a 7-footer. He would provide some rim protection, and he can move his feet on the perimeter. But he's not Keegan Murray defensively where he can guard 1 through 4. And so that just means you would need to get more wings, and it doesn't solve the problem of Harrison Barnes still starting on this team. Now, he could go in the trade, of course, but then you still need to replace him even if you trade him. And so you're giving up an extremely versatile player in Keegan Murray, the younger player, the player on the smaller deal, for a guy in Markkanen who is an amazing player, but you're giving up your assets because I'm talking about a Keegan Murray from Markkanen straight up trade. That wouldn't happen. The Jazz would want picks in all likelihood. And so you're giving up pretty much all of your valuable assets to just not make much of a difference, to just maybe get a little bit better. And you have no other ways to really get better other than signing free agents into your mid-level exception, which is only going to get you so far. And the same can be said for pretty much any trade. You cannot trade Keegan Murray because the whole point is you need more wings, so you can't trade out your best wing. And I've talked about it before, even in a trade for Brandon Ingram, you still need more wings. Even if you have Keegan and Ingram next to each other, you still need more wings. The Kings just need wings so badly, and they've needed that for a while, and this is the time to do it. And if you can get Markkanen without giving up Keegan Murray somehow, then you do it, and you don't hesitate. But that's simply just not going to happen, and so it's why I don't really put much stock into these rumors, because I don't see the Kings front office making this happen. Like, I don't understand. There's no reason to make that move. It would be such a lateral move with no way to get better in the future. Right now, for me, you have Ingram, Kuzma, and the Nets guys. That's like A, B, and C. Now, in what order, I'm not sure. I think you want Cameron Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith together. Like, you would want both of those guys in a trade, but that's plan C for me. And so I would be content with that. It wouldn't be the best move, but I would be content. But if the Kings have to go to like a plan D, which is just sign Haywood Highsmith or sign Caleb Martin or sign some other random wing player, like that's not good enough, let's be honest. And so for me, the minimum is like a Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith type deal. I go back and forth between who I want between Kuzma and Ingram. I used to lean towards the Kuzma side because he's on a team-friendly deal. It's declining. He's proven to be the type of player that can be a third guy on a championship team like he did with the Lakers. And so he's proven that he can take a backseat a little bit, but it is different when now he's had the taste of getting the ball more in Washington. Does he even want to take a step back? I mean, he could have just signed with us last season, and he didn't because he wanted the ball in his hands, I guess. But it allows you more flexibility, and we've seen through this free agency period so far that flexibility is the name of the game with the new CBA and the aprons. And with Brandon Ingram, you're going to have to give him a max deal. But at the same time, I'm thinking you're going to get expensive anyways. And Brandon Ingram is the better player between these two. I think he's the riskier option, but I think right now I'm leaning towards him because you have to take risks. So you go out and you get the better player, and then you have this like 2-year window before the team gets really expensive to try to make something happen. And then what happens after that, I don't know. You would still have guys under contract, like you would re-sign Fox, and Brandon Ingram would be under contract. Domantas Sabonis would be under contract. You would extend Keegan Murray, and you would still have Malik Monk. So you still have guys, but then it just becomes a lot harder to fill out a bench. Whereas if you have Kuzma, you might have a little more depth and a little more flexibility for a longer period of time, but is that core going to get it done? Look, either way, it's a risk, but I think for me, I'm siding on the guy that just has the higher ceiling. And, I don't think Brandon Ingram has reached his potential, but I think I would side with him because he's just a guy where you can give him the ball and he can just have games where he just is unconscious and doesn't miss and doesn't see any contests. And I think that having a guy like that just raises your ceiling. Like if everything goes right, then it could lead to big, big things for this team. Whereas with Kuzma, if everything goes right, then yeah, it could be very good as well. But I just don't think the ceiling is quite as high because Kuzma can create for himself as well and shoot over guys, but it's not quite the same. And so I think Markkanen is like the S tier acquisition and plan S in terms of if they just want to give him away without us having to give up Keegan Murray, then yeah, you do that. But plan A for me would be go after Brandon Ingram. Plan B is Kyle Kuzma, and plan C is Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith. And if one of A or B happens, you can still go out and get one of Cam Johnson or Dorian Finney-Smith, and maybe you go for the cheaper guy and Dorian Finney-Smith, because obviously you've now already spent your assets on getting the guy that's going to start. So now you go out and get the guy that's going to be on the bench. Hopefully this does happen somewhat soon, like in the next few days, that just we know what direction the Kings are going to go, because, I don't want to be waiting months for this to happen, because it's a possibility. It's a possibility that a trade doesn't get done until much later. Although I feel like that's unlikely, because both the Kings and the Pelicans or the Wizards or whoever, like they want to know what direction their roster is going to go, probably sooner rather than later. Right now, the Pelicans still don't have their center, their starting center, and so it's interesting. Like, I'm watching that because that plays a part in this Brandon Ingram deal. I'm looking at the Magic, trying to figure out what's going on with their center rotation. They got Wendell Carter Jr., they got Goga Batadze. Mo Wagner is a free agent still, but it seemed like they were going to re-sign him. So could one of those guys be someone to watch for the Pelicans? I mean, you don't want a guy like Goga Batadze or even Mo Wagner to be your starter. Do you even want Wendell Carter Jr.? I'm not so sure. But just at this point, those are the types of guys that you're looking at. And I assume the dream situation for them is getting Cleveland involved and getting Jared Allen. But I don't know, that just seems unlikely to me, just from Cleveland's perspective. And so I'm looking at the Magic, I'm looking at the Hawks still, because that seems to be a big deal. Like, that's a big deal to the Pelicans to be able to balance this roster. And so that's obviously a big deal as part of the Brandon Ingram trade, possibly. But we just have to continue to wait. It's the worst time of free agency. It's the worst time of the offseason. I'm just waiting for Summer League to get started up, so then we can start watching some games and not just be locked onto Twitter the whole time. But when something does happen, I will be right back here to talk about it. So I will see you guys then. Peace.